The military base was buzzing with activity as the new batch of recruits arrived. Among them was Sarah Martinez, a quiet woman in her early 30s who kept to herself. She had short brown hair, sharp green eyes, and carried herself with a confidence that some of the other recruits found intimidating. The training facility was tough, designed to break down even the strongest candidates. Most of the recruits were young men fresh out of high school or college, eager to prove themselves. They looked at Sarah with curiosity and some with doubt. She was older than most of them and didn't engage in their loud conversations or boasting sessions. During the first week of training, Sarah performed well but not exceptionally. She seemed to be holding back, completing exercises with just enough effort to pass. Her bunkmates, 3 women named Jessica, Maria, and Kelly, tried to include her in their conversations. But Sarah remained polite, yet distant. The physical training was brutal. Every morning at 5, they would run 5 miles, followed by strength training, combat drills, and weapons practice. Sarah completed everything without complaint, never falling behind but never pushing to be first either. Her instructors noticed her steady performance, but couldn't quite figure her out. The trouble started during the 3rd week. A group of male recruits led by a loud, arrogant young man named Brad Thompson began making comments about the women in the program. Brad came from a wealthy family and believed his father's connections would guarantee his success in the military. He was tall, muscular, and had never been told no in his life. "I don't understand why they let women in these programs," Brad said loudly during lunch one day, making sure his voice carried across the mess hall. "They're just going to slow everyone down when things get real." His friends laughed and agreed, casting looks toward the table where Sarah sat quietly eating her meal. She didn't react to their comments, which seemed to frustrate Brad even more. He was used to getting reactions from people, used to being the center of attention. As the weeks progressed, Brad's comments became more targeted. He would make jokes about women not belonging in combat situations, about them being too emotional or physically weak. The female recruits were getting tired of his behavior, but they knew that causing trouble could affect their standing in the program. Sarah continued to ignore the harassment, focusing on her training. She excelled in marksmanship, showing natural skill with various weapons. Her hand-to-hand combat techniques were smooth and efficient, though she still seemed to be holding back her full potential. The instructors were starting to take notice, but Sarah deflected any praise or attention. One evening, after a particularly difficult training exercise, Brad and his group cornered Maria in the hallway. They didn't touch her, but they surrounded her and made inappropriate comments that left her upset and shaken. Sarah found Maria crying in their shared room later that night. "I can't take much more of this," Maria whispered. "Brad and his friends are making this place hell for all of us women. The instructors either don't see it or don't care." Sarah listened quietly, her jaw tightening slightly. "Have you reported it?" "What's the point? It's our word against theirs, and Brad's father is some big shot. We'll just get labeled as troublemakers," Maria replied. The next day, Brad escalated his behavior even further. During a group exercise, he deliberately bumped into Jessica, causing her to fall and injure her ankle. When she protested, he claimed it was an accident and that she should be more careful if she couldn't handle the physical demands of training. That evening, as the recruits headed to the showers after a long day of training, Brad and his friends were particularly rowdy. They had been making crude jokes and comments about the women all day, emboldened by what they saw as their untouchable status. The shower facilities were separated by gender, but the entrances were close together. As Sarah walked toward the women's showers, she could hear Brad's voice echoing from the men's side, making disgusting comments about what he imagined the women looked like in the showers. Sarah paused for a moment, her hands clenching into fists. She had endured weeks of watching this behavior, staying silent for the sake of her cover and mission. But something inside her snapped when she heard Brad describe in graphic detail what he wanted to do to her fellow female recruits. Instead of entering the women's showers, Sarah turned around and walked straight into the men's shower area. The facility was designed as an open space with multiple shower heads along the walls. Steam filled the air, and several recruits were in various stages of washing. Brad was standing near the far wall, still talking loudly to his friends about the women. He was facing away from the entrance, so he didn't see Sarah enter. His friends noticed her first, their conversation stopping abruptly as they stared in shock. "What the hell do you think you're doing in here?" one of Brad's friends stammered, reaching for a towel to cover himself. Brad turned around, a sneer forming on his face when he saw Sarah standing there, fully clothed and completely unintimidated by the situation. "Well, well, well. Look who finally decided to show some backbone. You lost, sweetheart. The women's showers are over there." Sarah didn't respond immediately. She studied Brad's face, noting the arrogance and entitlement written across his features. Around them, other recruits were quickly grabbing towels and backing away, sensing that something significant was about to happen. "I heard you talking," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying clearly through the tiled space. "About me and the other women." Brad laughed, crossing his arms over his chest despite his state of undress. "So what if you did? It's a free country. Don't like what you hear? Maybe you should find another line of work." "You think you can intimidate women because you believe you're untouchable," Sarah continued, stepping closer. "You think your daddy's connections make you special." "My father is a decorated general, and I'm going to be one too," Brad boasted. "You're nobody. Just another washout waiting to happen." The tension in the room was thick. Several recruits had grabbed their clothes and left, not wanting to be involved in whatever was about to unfold. Others lingered, unable to look away from the confrontation. Sarah nodded slowly, as if considering his words. "A general, huh? That's impressive. Tell me, Brad, what do you know about real combat? About leading soldiers in actual dangerous situations?" "More than you ever will," Brad shot back. "I've been preparing for this my whole life. I've studied every major military campaign, every strategic victory. I know more about warfare than most of the instructors here." "Book learning," Sarah said dismissively. "That's not the same as experience." Brad's face reddened with anger. "And I suppose you have experience? You're what? Some secretary who decided to play soldier? You can barely keep up with the training here." Sarah's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. She seemed to grow taller, more imposing, despite her relatively average height. "You want to know about my experience?" "Sure, enlighten me," Brad said mockingly. "I've spent the last 12 years in active combat situations," Sarah said calmly. "I've led missions in Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, and places you've never heard of because they're classified. I've saved the lives of soldiers who were better men than you'll ever be." Brad laughed, but there was less confidence in it now. "Right. And I'm the president. You expect me to believe some random recruit is some kind of war hero?" Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out a small waterproof case. She opened it and revealed military identification that made Brad's eyes widen. Even from a distance, the other recruits could see official seals and classifications they didn't recognize. "Commander Sarah Martinez," she said quietly. "United States Navy SEALs. I'm not here as a recruit, Brad. I'm here undercover, evaluating the training program and the quality of candidates being produced." The shower room fell completely silent except for the sound of running water. Brad's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water as he tried to process what he was hearing. "That's impossible," he finally managed. "Women can't be SEALs." Sarah's smile was cold and sharp. "The program opened to women 5 years ago. I was in the first class to complete it. I've been operational ever since." She stepped closer to Brad, who involuntarily took a step backward. Everything you've said and done for the past 3 weeks has been documented. Every inappropriate comment, every act of harassment, every display of the exact kind of toxic leadership that gets soldiers killed in real situations. Brad looked around desperately at his friends, but they had all backed away, some of them clearly believing Sarah's revelation. The pieces were falling into place for them. Her calm competence, her obvious experience, the way she carried herself. "You're lying," Brad said weakly. "This is some kind of joke." Sarah pulled out her phone and quickly dialed a number. "Colonel Richards, this is Commander Martinez." "Yes, sir. I'm ready to file my report early. We have a situation that needs immediate attention." She listened for a moment, then looked directly at Brad. "Yes, sir. Recruit Thompson. Exactly the kind of behavior we discussed." Brad's face went pale as he realized this wasn't a joke or a bluff. Sarah ended the call and looked at him with something approaching pity. "You could have been a good soldier, Brad. You have some of the physical tools. But leadership isn't about intimidating people who can't fight back. It's about protecting those under your command and earning their respect through competence and character." The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the shower facility as military police entered. Brad and his friends quickly scrambled for towels as uniformed officers filled the space. "Commander Martinez?" one of the MPs asked. "That's correct, Sergeant. These are the individuals we discussed." As the MPs began to escort Brad and his closest associates out of the showers, Brad turned back to Sarah with desperation in his eyes. "Wait! You can't do this! My father will hear about this." Sarah's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. "Your father is going to be very disappointed when he learns how poorly you represent the values he fought to protect. Real military leaders don't need to threaten or intimidate others to prove their worth." The shower facility emptied quickly as the remaining recruits followed the MPs out, leaving Sarah alone in the steamy space. She leaned against the wall for a moment, finally allowing herself to show the exhaustion she felt from maintaining her cover for so long. She had successfully completed the first phase of her mission, but she knew the real work was just beginning. The training program needed serious reforms, and there were likely other problems throughout the system that needed to be addressed. As she finally headed toward the women's showers to clean up properly, Sarah reflected on how much had changed in just a few minutes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for tonight, she could take satisfaction in knowing that at least some of the toxic behavior plaguing the program had been exposed and would be dealt with appropriately. The news of the shower confrontation spread through the military base like wildfire. By the next morning, every recruit, instructor, and staff member had heard some version of what had happened. The details grew more dramatic with each telling, but the core truth remained shocking to everyone who heard it. Sarah Martinez, the quiet woman they had all assumed was just another struggling recruit, was actually a Navy SEAL commander conducting an undercover investigation of their training program. The revelation sent shockwaves throughout the entire facility. Colonel Richards arrived at the base early that morning, his expression grim as he met with Sarah in a secure conference room. He was a tall, distinguished man in his 50s with graying hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He had been the one to approve Sarah's undercover mission, and he was eager to hear her preliminary findings. "Commander Martinez," he said as he sat across from her at the polished table, "I understand last night's events forced you to reveal your identity earlier than planned." Sarah nodded, her posture straight and professional. She had returned to her natural bearing now that her cover was blown, and the difference was remarkable. Gone was the hesitant recruit, replaced by a confident military officer with years of combat experience. "Yes, sir." The situation with Recruit Thompson and his associates had escalated to the point where I felt immediate intervention was necessary. Their behavior was creating a hostile environment that could have led to serious incidents. Colonel Richards reviewed the thick file in front of him. I've read your preliminary reports. The harassment, the toxic leadership behaviors, the lack of proper oversight. It's worse than we suspected. That's just the surface, sir, Sarah replied. In the 3 weeks I was undercover, I identified systemic problems that go far beyond a few bad recruits. The instructors are either unaware of what's happening or they're actively ignoring it. The colonel leaned back in his chair, his expression troubled. Explain. Sarah opened her own notebook, filled with detailed observations she had made during her time as a fake recruit. The harassment wasn't subtle, sir. It was loud, public, and ongoing, yet not a single instructor intervened or addressed it. Either they're incompetent or they believe this kind of behavior is acceptable. And which do you think it is? A combination of both, Sarah said bluntly. Some of the younger instructors seem genuinely unaware of modern military standards regarding conduct and leadership. Others, particularly the older staff, appear to view the harassment as a form of toughening up or weeding out weak candidates. Colonel Richards made notes as she spoke. What about the training program itself? How would you assess the quality of instruction? Sarah was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. The physical training is adequate. Though not particularly innovative, the weapons training is solid but basic. The real problem is the complete lack of leadership development and character assessment. Elaborate. Sir, we're training soldiers, not just fighters. The program focuses entirely on physical capabilities and basic technical skills while ignoring the psychological and ethical components of military service. Recruits like Thompson can excel in the physical aspects while harboring attitudes that make them dangerous liabilities in actual combat situations. The colonel set down his pen and looked directly at Sarah. Recommendations? Complete overhaul of the instructor training program, implementation of zero-tolerance policies for harassment, regular psychological evaluations of recruits, and mandatory leadership ethics training, Sarah replied without hesitation. But more importantly, we need to change the culture from the top down. A knock on the conference room door interrupted their discussion. Colonel Richards called for whoever it was to enter, and a young lieutenant stepped inside. Sir, the base commander is requesting an immediate meeting with you and Commander Martinez. There's been a development. The colonel and Sarah exchanged glances before following the lieutenant to the base commander's office. General Patricia Hayes was a formidable woman in her late 40s who had earned her position through exceptional service in both combat and administrative roles. She stood as they entered, her expression serious. Colonel Richards, Commander Martinez, she said formally. Please sit down. We have a problem. Sarah and the colonel took seats facing the general's desk. General Hayes remained standing, clearly agitated about something. I received a phone call 30 minutes ago from General Thompson, Brad Thompson's father, she began. He's demanding a full investigation into what he calls the unlawful detention and harassment of his son. Colonel Richards leaned forward. Ma'am, the detention was completely lawful. Recruit Thompson was engaging in behavior that violated multiple military regulations. I understand that, Colonel, but General Thompson is claiming his son was set up, that Commander Martinez deliberately provoked the confrontation to justify her investigation findings. Sarah felt a flash of anger but kept her expression neutral. Ma'am, with respect, I documented Recruit Thompson's behavior over a 3-week period before any confrontation occurred. The evidence speaks for itself. General Hayes sat down and opened a file on her desk. I've read your reports, Commander, and I believe them completely. However, General Thompson carries significant political influence, and he's threatening to take this matter to the Pentagon if we don't handle it to his satisfaction. What exactly is he demanding? Colonel Richards asked. He wants his son reinstated in the program with a formal apology, and he wants Commander Martinez reprimanded for what he calls entrapment and inappropriate conduct. Sarah couldn't hide her reaction this time. Inappropriate conduct? I was conducting an authorized investigation into serious problems within the training program. I know that, Commander. but General Thompson is claiming you had no right to infiltrate the program under false pretenses, and that your presence in the men's shower facility was inappropriate regardless of the circumstances." Colonel Richards stood up, his face reddening with anger. "Ma'am, that's completely absurd. Commander Martinez was acting within her authority and following direct orders from my office." General Hayes held up her hand. "I agree, Colonel, but we need to be prepared for this to become a much bigger issue. General Thompson has already contacted Senator Bradley's office, and they're asking questions." Sarah felt the familiar weight of military politics settling on her shoulders. She had dealt with similar situations before, where the truth became secondary to political considerations and personal connections. "Ma'am, what are our options?" she asked. "We continue the investigation and back up our findings with solid evidence," General Hayes replied. "But we need to be absolutely certain everything we've done is by the book." Over the next several hours, Sarah found herself in a series of meetings with various officials who wanted to hear her account of events. Each time, she provided the same detailed, factual report of what had occurred during her undercover assignment. Meanwhile, word of the situation had reached the other recruits, and the reaction was mixed. Some of the female recruits were relieved that the harassment had finally been addressed, while others worried about potential backlash. The male recruits were divided between those who supported Brad Thompson and those who were disgusted by his behavior. Jessica, Maria, and Kelly found Sarah in the mess hall during lunch break. They sat down at her table cautiously, still adjusting to the revelation of her true identity. "Commander Martinez," Jessica began hesitantly, "we wanted to thank you for standing up for us." Sarah looked up from her meal. "You don't need to thank me. It was my job." "No, it was more than that," Maria insisted. "You could have just documented everything and filed a report. Instead, you put yourself on the line to stop it immediately." Kelly nodded in agreement. "Some of the other recruits are saying you went too far, that you should have handled it through official channels first." Sarah set down her fork and looked at the three women seriously. "Let me tell you something about official channels. Sometimes they work, and sometimes they don't. When someone is being harmed, you don't always have the luxury of waiting for paperwork to be processed." "But now there's all this drama with Brad's father," Jessica said. "Are you going to get in trouble?" "Maybe," Sarah replied honestly. "But that's my problem to deal with. Your job is to focus on your training and become the best soldiers you can be." That afternoon, Sarah was called back to meet with Colonel Richards and General Hayes. This time, they were joined by a stern-looking woman in civilian clothes who introduced herself as Ms. Chen from the Inspector General's office. "Commander Martinez," Ms. Chen began, "I'm here to conduct an independent review of your undercover investigation and the events of last night. I need you to walk me through everything from the beginning." For the next 3 hours, Sarah provided a detailed account of her mission, her observations, and the confrontation in the showers. Ms. Chen took extensive notes and asked pointed questions about procedures, authorization, and documentation. "Commander, you stated that you entered the men's shower facility to confront Recruit Thompson about his behavior. Some might argue that this was an unnecessary escalation," Ms. Chen said. Sarah had been expecting this question. "Ma'am, I had been documenting Thompson's harassment for 3 weeks. On the night in question, his comments crossed a line into graphic sexual descriptions of what he wanted to do to the female recruits. In my judgment, this represented an immediate threat that required direct intervention. But you could have reported it through normal channels?" "I could have, yes, but based on my 3 weeks of observation, I had no confidence that normal channels would have resulted in effective action. The instructors had been either ignoring or enabling this behavior throughout my time here." Ms. Chen made more notes. "And your decision to maintain your cover while confronting him? I needed him to understand that his behavior was unacceptable regardless of who was witnessing it. If I had revealed my identity first, he might have viewed it as punishment from authority rather than accountability for his actions. The questioning continued until late in the evening, covering every aspect of Sarah's mission and methodology. Throughout it all, she remained calm and professional, confident in her decisions and actions. As the meeting concluded, Ms. Chen closed her notebook and looked at Sarah directly. "Commander, off the record, I want you to know that your service record speaks for itself. What you've accomplished in the SEAL teams is remarkable." "Thank you, ma'am. However, this situation is politically complex, and there will likely be significant pressure to find fault with your methods rather than address the underlying problems you've identified." General Hayes leaned forward. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that we need to be prepared for this investigation to become more about politics than facts," Ms. Chen replied. "General Thompson has powerful friends, and they may try to make Commander Martinez a scapegoat to avoid addressing the real issues in this training program." Sarah felt a familiar frustration building. She had spent years fighting enemies overseas, only to come home and fight bureaucracy and politics. But she had signed up for this mission knowing it would be difficult, and she was prepared to see it through regardless of the consequences. "Ma'am, what happens next?" she asked. "We wait for the full investigation to be completed," General Hayes replied. "In the meantime, you'll be reassigned to temporary duties here on base while this gets sorted out." As Sarah left the meeting, she realized that the confrontation in the showers had been just the beginning. The real battle was about to begin, and it would be fought in conference rooms and offices rather than on training grounds. But she was determined to ensure that the problems she had identified would be addressed, regardless of what happened to her personally. The hallways of the base felt different now that her cover was blown. Other personnel looked at her with curiosity and respect, knowing they were in the presence of an elite warrior who had seen real combat. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the most challenging part of her mission was still ahead of her. 3 weeks had passed since the shower confrontation, and the investigation had taken on a life of its own. The media had somehow gotten wind of the story, and headlines about female Navy SEAL confronts recruits were spreading across military news outlets. What had started as an internal investigation was now a public relations nightmare for the military. Sarah found herself confined to base while the inquiry continued. She spent her days in temporary quarters, reviewing documents and preparing for yet another round of questioning. The political pressure was mounting, and she could feel the weight of powerful forces aligning against her. General Thompson had made good on his threats, and the case had reached the Pentagon. High-ranking officials were demanding answers, and there were whispers that Sarah might face disciplinary action for her methods, regardless of what she had uncovered. On a gray Tuesday morning, Sarah was summoned to what she was told would be the final hearing. The conference room was larger this time, filled with more brass than she had seen in one place since her SEAL graduation ceremony. At the head of the table sat Admiral Susan Crawford, a legend in the Navy and one of the highest-ranking women in military history. Admiral Crawford was known for her no-nonsense approach and her unwavering commitment to military excellence. She had fought her own battles against discrimination and politics throughout her career, rising to her position through pure competence and determination. "Commander Martinez," Admiral Crawford said as Sarah entered the room, "please take a seat." The tension in the room was thick. Sarah could see Colonel Richards and General Hayes seated to one side, while several officials she didn't recognize occupied the other chairs. Ms. Chen from the Inspector General's office was also present, along with what appeared to be Pentagon representatives. "Commander, we've reviewed your complete report, all testimony from witnesses, and the findings of multiple investigations," Admiral Crawford began. "Before we proceed, is there anything you'd like to add to your previous statements?" Sarah stood at attention. "No, ma'am. My reports have been complete and accurate." "Very well." The Admiral opened a thick folder in front of her. "Let's start with the allegations against you. General Thompson has claimed that your undercover investigation was conducted without proper authorization, that you deliberately provoked the confrontation with his son, and that your conduct in the shower facility was inappropriate and potentially illegal. Sarah remained silent, waiting for the Admiral to continue. However, Admiral Crawford said, her tone shifting slightly, our investigation has revealed some interesting facts that General Thompson apparently wasn't aware of when he made his complaints. She pulled out a series of documents and spread them across the table. First, your undercover mission was not only properly authorized, it was specifically requested by the Secretary of the Navy based on multiple complaints about conditions at this training facility. Sarah felt a small surge of relief but kept her expression neutral. Second, we've conducted interviews with every recruit in the program, not just those involved in the immediate incident. The picture that emerged is quite damning, Commander, but not for you. Admiral Crawford gestured to Miss Chen, who stood and addressed the room. Our investigation found a pattern of harassment and misconduct that goes back at least 2 years. Recruit Thompson was not an isolated case, but rather part of a systematic problem that had been ignored by the training staff. Furthermore, the Admiral continued, we discovered that several female recruits had previously filed informal complaints about harassment, but these were either dismissed or actively suppressed by instructors who felt such behavior was character building. Sarah was surprised by this revelation. During her 3 weeks undercover, she had suspected there were deeper problems, but she hadn't realized the extent of the institutional failure. Ma'am, Sarah said carefully, I wasn't aware of previous complaints. Of course you weren't, Commander, because they were never properly documented or investigated, which brings us to the most interesting discovery of our inquiry. Admiral Crawford pulled out another set of documents, these bearing official Pentagon seals. 3 months ago, General Thompson himself signed off on a memo recommending that this facility be investigated for potential leadership and training deficiencies. He specifically mentioned concerns about the treatment of female recruits. The room fell silent. Sarah could see the shock on several faces as the implications became clear. It appears, the Admiral continued, that General Thompson was fully aware there were problems at this facility. His son was not an innocent victim caught up in an unfair investigation. He was a documented part of the very problems his father had recommended be examined. Ms. Chen stepped forward again. General Thompson's initial response to his son's arrest was to demand the charges be dropped without any investigation. It was only when he realized the scope of our inquiry that he began claiming his son was being unfairly targeted. Admiral Crawford leaned back in her chair, her expression stern. Commander Martinez, your methods may have been unconventional, but they were effective and ultimately necessary. The confrontation in the shower facility, while dramatic, prevented what our psychologists believe could have escalated into a serious assault. Sarah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, but she remained cautious. Military politics could be unpredictable, and she had learned never to assume victory until it was officially declared. However, the Admiral continued, there are consequences to this entire situation that go far beyond your individual case. She stood and walked to a wall-mounted screen, which displayed an organizational chart of the training facility. Based on your findings and our subsequent investigation, we're implementing immediate and comprehensive changes to this program. The screen changed to show a new command structure. General Hayes will be reassigned to oversee a complete overhaul of recruit training protocols across all branches. Colonel Richards will head a new task force on leadership development and character assessment. Sarah watched as the Admiral outlined sweeping changes to military training programs, realizing that her 3 weeks undercover had triggered reforms that would affect thousands of future soldiers. As for Recruit Thompson and his associates, Admiral Crawford said, returning to her seat, they've been discharged from the program and barred from military service. Their behavior was documented extensively, and there will be formal disciplinary actions in their permanent records. The Admiral then turned her attention directly to Sarah. "Commander Martinez, your service record speaks for itself, but this mission has demonstrated something beyond your combat capabilities. You've shown the kind of moral courage and leadership that exemplifies the best of what our military should be." Sarah felt a surge of pride, but also relief that her career and reputation were intact. "Therefore," Admiral Crawford continued, "I'm pleased to offer you a new assignment. The Pentagon is creating a special oversight division to monitor training facilities and ensure compliance with our new standards. We want you to head that division with the rank of full captain." The promotion was significant, representing not just recognition of her service, but trust in her judgment and leadership abilities. Sarah felt honored, but also aware of the enormous responsibility being placed on her shoulders. "Ma'am, I'm honored by your confidence in me," Sarah replied formally. "There's one more thing," the Admiral said, pulling out a final document. "This entire incident has highlighted the need for better integration of women into special operations programs. The SEAL teams have requested that you return to active duty as a training officer, helping to prepare the next generation of female special operators." Sarah had always loved her operational role, but she could see the value in helping other women succeed in the challenging world of special operations. Her experience, both in combat and in this investigation, made her uniquely qualified for such a position. "I'd like some time to consider the options, ma'am," Sarah said. "Of course. Take all the time you need." Admiral Crawford closed her folder and looked around the room. "Gentlemen, ladies, this concludes our formal hearing. Commander Martinez, congratulations on a successful mission." As the officials filed out of the room, Colonel Richards approached Sarah with a smile. "Outstanding work, Commander. I knew you were the right person for this assignment." "Thank you, sir. Though I have to admit, I never expected it to become this complicated." General Hayes also stopped to speak with her. "Commander, I want you to know that the changes we're implementing are largely based on your recommendations. You've probably prevented countless future incidents and saved careers that might have been damaged by the toxic environment that was developing here." Later that evening, Sarah found herself back in the mess hall where this whole situation had begun. The atmosphere was completely different now. The female recruits who remained in the program were more confident, more engaged. The male recruits seemed more respectful and focused on their training rather than on establishing dominance. Jessica, Maria, and Kelly approached her table, now comfortable in speaking with her directly. "Commander Martinez," Maria said, "we heard about your promotion. Congratulations." "Thank you. How has training been since the changes started?" "Completely different," Jessica replied. "It's actually about becoming better soldiers now, not just surviving harassment." Kelly nodded enthusiastically. "The new instructors they brought in are amazing. They actually care about helping us succeed instead of trying to break us down." Sarah felt satisfaction knowing that her mission had achieved its goals. But she also understood that this was just the beginning. Changing military culture was a long-term process that would require constant vigilance and commitment. "Commander," Maria said quietly, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "When you were in the shower confronting Brad, weren't you scared? Not of him, but of what might happen to your career?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I was concerned about the consequences, yes, but I've learned that doing the right thing often requires accepting personal risk. That's what leadership means." "Do you think we can make it? In the military, I mean, as women?" Jessica asked. "I think you can make it if you're willing to work harder than anyone expects, if you're committed to excellence, and if you remember that you're not just representing yourselves, but paving the way for the women who come after you." The conversation continued for another hour, with Sarah sharing stories from her SEAL training and combat deployments. She found herself enjoying the mentorship role, something she hadn't expected when she first took the undercover assignment. As she finally headed back to her quarters, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that night in the showers. What had started as a simple investigation had transformed into a career-defining moment and a catalyst for institutional change. She thought about the decision she needed to make regarding her future assignment. Both options would allow her to continue serving her country, but in very different ways. The oversight position would let her ensure that the problems she had uncovered didn't resurface elsewhere. The training role would allow her to directly impact the next generation of special operators. Standing at her window overlooking the training grounds, Sarah watched as evening exercises continued under the new leadership. The atmosphere was professional, focused, and respectful. For the first time since arriving at the base, she felt genuinely optimistic about the future of military training. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Admiral Crawford. "Commander, whatever you decide about your next assignment, know that you've already made a lasting impact. The military is stronger because of officers like you." Sarah smiled as she put her phone away. Tomorrow she would make her decision about the future, but tonight she could take satisfaction in knowing that her willingness to confront injustice had created positive change that would benefit countless future service members. The shower confrontation that had seemed like such a risk at the time had turned out to be exactly the catalyst needed to address long-standing problems. Sometimes, Sarah realized, the most important battles weren't fought with weapons, but with courage, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to doing what's right.